Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and gender-neutral pronouns. I am Arch Harrison, joined by my other co-founder of Latitude, Alex Mako, whatever you prefer to call him. Alex, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It's Latitude Alex checking in on this night's stream. What is it? Just after midnight. So
Just after midnight. It's late night. We're taking back late night.
yeah, man. I'm glad to do it though because we have our platform going. We're not we have no commercials. We have none of that. So no advertisements, no paywall. So I'm ready to do it.
I'm not getting paid for this. I'm doing this all voluntarily. So, speaking of voluntarism, let's get into our topics for tonight. One of our topics for tonight will cover a very large range. We're gonna start off, or we're not gonna start off necessarily with, but we got anarchy and libertarianism, benefits and disadvantages. Then we got postmodernism, which we can also tie into the California fiasco with the AIDS knowingly passing that on, as well as the pronoun mistaking fiasco that's going on down there. Then we also got Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and what the future of that is looking like. Then we have the GOP healthcare proposition, and Second Amendment, as usual, because this is America, and we've got the Second Amendment, and other countries don't, and that means that they are worse than us. So let's get into it, shall we?
Let's start off with the first thing we read off, which is anarchy and libertarianism. As there's sort of some similarities, overlaps, and differences, and I think I'm gonna start this one off with questioning Latitude Arch here because Arch Harrison has a pretty good background when it comes to reading material on anarchism specifically.
I'm reading like 3 books right now. I got In the Fed by Ron Paul, A Libertarian Mind by David Boers, I want to say, and then A Spontaneous Order by Chase Michaels, which is also with a subtitle, The Capitalist Case for a Stateless Society.
All right, so as far as we know, we have the basic principles of anarchism and everything, especially in anarcho-capitalism, where it's mostly based on voluntarism and going about your daily life in society, making voluntary exchanges of labor and services in exchange for goods, services, everything. It goes both ways, no force involved. But there are some big debates that are coming out, and I do want to reference something that I saw today. Maybe Latitude Arch can give us some response on this. I'm going to pull it up and put it on the screen real quick. I got this sent in from a friend, and I decided that, this is going to be an interesting thing to show on the stream, and maybe Arch Harrison can give us some response to this. So give me a second real quick. I'll bring it up.
If you can send that over to me too, I would appreciate that. So I'll pull up some definitions and everything just to get this going. All right, let's check this out. Oh, that's not what I need to do.
All right, so the background here is there's this, I guess it's a Reddit post that was going around, and one of my friends sent this to me. And he said it was something just funny about anarcho-capitalists, and mind you, this is from the anarcho-capitalism Reddit board. So again, I'm going to have to hand it off to Arch Harrison to give us a valid perception of whether validate this perception of anarcho-capitalism. So if we can read this off here, so it's basically a discussion where two anarcho-capitalists are talking about public roads. This has always been a huge debate between statists and anarchists, where
lots of memes come from this too.
Lots.
So I mean, I'm not complaining.
I think it's justified though, because it is one of the big. It's a very good example of whether we should have anarchism or a statist society.
But
so
my roads,
my roads, exactly. So. What are they saying here? So my solution would be some kind of public road company within a community. Like the company is jointly owned by the people living in the community. All right. So respond to that first, Arch Harrison. How do you view that? The company is jointly owned by the people living in the community.
company is joined by the people living in the community. If you take that at face value, I see communism written all over that. I see the idea of I see the idea that you seize the means of production from the owners of the company and instead make it evenly distributed out through the people. So that first sentence basically just says communism to me.
So yeah, it invalidates one of the.
It invalidates it gets away from the capitalism in anarcho-capitalism.
Right. Okay, so followed by that, they have, I don't know how such a company would build people, but I figure it would be based on how much traffic you generate. All right, is that I mean, this is a very nuanced discussion about how they would, I guess, go about the capitalist way of, I don't know, it seems very
of profiting.
Yeah, there's profit involved, but at the same time, the company's owned by the people living in the community. So is that do those things can those things not coexist in the same under the same umbrella? Is what's the framework that's laid out here?
Well, I mean, if you think about it from like a toll road perspective, like you go up north, you have to pay tolls to go on certain roads. That's one way that you could profit from a road. But if you aren't trying to profit and it's owned by the people in the community, then they're basically mutually exclusive.
All right, and then I'm pretty sure roads in Kapistan would be joined ventures between stakeholders of the road in question. Would be joint ventures between stakeholders of the road.
So is that saying that two different people that like to connect a road, they're owned by two separate private people? Is that what they're trying to say?
Right. Yeah, and the people who own, who have a stake in that road. Yeah. It's hard to. This is hard to read.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure. What do you think? Well, yeah, exactly. They're not even sure with their own statements. So the response is literally a quote, and then it says that's called socialism, which
it's very true.
Exactly, it's what you already pointed out here. So I think
look at it, and also even just saying company and community in the same sentence. Exactly. Basically, any sort of collectivism can be associated with that.
Right. And what is give us your brief, I guess, anarcho-capitalist approach on collectivism versus individualism? That's a debate I love to have because that's a big one going on right now.
So my biggest thing with collectivism versus individualism, the way I think of it is, should someone we take it from the democracy point of view. People think that democracy is such a great thing, and it does have its benefits. I'll admit to that, but it also has its very, very bad downfalls. So think about it this way. If I live on a farm isolated from everyone, and I just want to live my life my certain way, and then people in California decide to vote, and they, holding such a large population, they win the majority of this vote that says, I can no longer farm. I and all other farmers can no longer farm corn because of some reason. Why should they have to be able to decide that when I personally am not benefiting from this farming of corn and I'm using it for myself? Why should they have to legislate it when I'm an individual working for myself and myself only? That's one of my big things with individualism, is that it's a group of people, or it's not a group of people, it's just a singular person that wants to be by themselves and benefit themselves only. And then there are people like in a collectivist society where you have a group of people that decide, since we all agree, then we're all going to go by the same thing. But then there's that person in there, there's inevitably going to be some person that's going to be greedy, that doesn't want to assimilate with how everything else goes. And that's the thing. Greed is another thing that comes out of that. Greed is what makes the world go round. Greed is what brings about all this change. Greed is what brought about cars. Greed is what brought about iPhones. No one did it to benefit the society. They did it to benefit themselves.
I would even go as far as to say that greed is what brings about government policy. the greed of poor people for greater socialized medicine and social welfare and everything from government.
Mhm.
I often argue that, I mean, poor people can be as greedy as rich people. I mean, what the question always goes, well, what is greed? And then immediately it's followed by, I'm not greedy. It's always it's always the other person that's greedy.
And that's the thing that collectivists usually fail to acknowledge. They fail to acknowledge that greed exists. Greed exists, and that is why communism, for example, can and never will work.
Exactly.
Because greed is a thing. Someone will want more than another person. There's no benefit to sitting here and um, working as a janitor at a hospital, getting paid the same as a doctor that works there. There's no need to go that high. Why would I study for years becoming a doctor?
Yeah.
When I could get paid the exact same as working as a janitor.
Right, and I think that'll go into the postmodernist argument as well later on. But
Mhm.
the next thing I want to ask is, in terms of anarcho-capitalism, in regards to institutions such as like the publicly funded volunteer, firemen, like when we have rescue teams and hospitals and firefighters and everything and all that, those institutions that are currently under the public domain, typically at the local level, which is good, obviously. But obviously the anarcho-capitalists believe that it can be taken down even to the individual level, on a voluntary level. So how do you think that those institutions, such as the fire department and the local hospitals and everything, can be brought into an anarcho-capitalist system from a public domain system?
All right. So one thing that I wanted to cite was, while I was scrolling through Twitter today, a great place to find memes and local source of information. So we live in Arizona, yes, and I saw that there was this group of Scottsdale firefighters were going to they were going to Northern California to help out with the fires voluntarily. They weren't being forced to, because they're not even in the same county, let alone the same state, but they did it voluntarily to help, because burning forests and burning people's houses isn't exactly a good thing. So if people recognize that and they go and they voluntarily go, then that's a overall net plus, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's always, if there's a person that wants to, there are people that want to grow up and be firefighters. If we got rid of firefighters, does that mean that or if we got rid of publicly funded firefighters, would that mean that we would get rid of firefighters overall? No, I don't think so. Because there would still be people with that aspiration to go and help and to do that same thing. There would be people that would be selfless enough to go and do it. And that's another thing that people think, that right when you establish anarchism or individualism, that people are just going to be completely selfish. And the idea behind it, yes, is selfishness, but there are still people that are going to be selfless, that are wanting to help. And one thing that I like to cite from that is nonprofit organizations and that are government funded, and then charities. I feel like a charity is a lot more helpful, and has been proven is a charity is a lot more helpful and has been statistically proven to help more genuinely disadvantaged people than government has with government funded programs.
I would also add to that there was a historical trend that was shown that when government was less involved in the economy, the amount of money given to charity was enormous. And then when government became more and more, heavily involved in the economy with regulation and taxation and income tax and corporate taxes, the money given to charity significantly decreased, while the money given in taxes to the government increased, progressively or exponentially. So,
And another thing that we can look at when we talk about taxes and charity, Bill Gates, one of the richest people in the world, the only reason this is my hypothesis, the only reason he's really donating to charity is because if he donates a lot of his money, then he doesn't get taxed as much on his own money that he gets to keep.
Right.
So I mean, and he makes how much money does Bill Gates make roughly a year?
Oh, it's insane. It's super high.
Well, so he gives a super high amount to a charity.
Right.
And then he keeps a smaller percentage for himself, because he has, like, honestly, if we look at it from a standpoint, people with billions of dollars, once they have billions of dollars, they're going to realize, oh, well, I don't really need anything else. Once they have what they want, then they're going to start going and investing in other things. They're going to start throwing their money in other places because they have more money that they made on their own.
Right.
But now that's starting to sound like Keynesian economics, but...
Yeah.
No. That's...
Well, let's get back to the public, the institutions in the public domain, especially the ones that are voluntary, like the fire department. So let's say, okay, we're in the stateless society where it's operated through a capitalist economic system, and people, do you believe that what would be the incentive for people to donate? Do you think that a fire department would still be run on a donation-based system, or would it be run on a profit-based system where people pay for the service, or how would it work at again, would it operate at a community level, or would it operate at an individual level where an individual pays for the service? How does the fire department work? Like, if their house is on fire, how do they know that they're going to be given that service when they demand it in an emergency?
I feel like it would be a mix of both. There would be I feel like it would be a small charge for, like, if my house burnt down, I would pay a small fee for having people come and help stop my house from burning down. But then there would be people that would be like, oh, this is an overall net positive for our neighborhood, because if one person's house starts to burn down and it doesn't get under control, then all of our other houses are burning down, which is a violation of the NAP. I had to throw in the NAP somewhere.
Well, yeah, it's one of the principles.
So, but if you have that neighborhood incentive, where you're my next door neighbor and I don't want your house to burn down, because if your house burns down, then my house is likely to burn down. So then you and I and everyone else in our neighborhood decide, hey, if we invest a little bit of money into this, then it'll be an overall positive for if it happens. It's just kind of like getting insurance, Not that I think that I'm going to, not that I know I'm going to get in an accident, but if I get in an accident, it's better for me to have that than to not have it.
Right.
It's better to need it and not have it than to have it and not need it. That's the phrase, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I also have to admit that I didn't set up a framework in which people totally forgot what the importance of the fire department was. That's a big thing too. That's a big idea too, because if there is a shift to a stateless society with a capitalist economic system, that doesn't mean that people transitioned the department over to an entirely profit-driven system. And you cannot infer from that framework that profit generally means selfishness, and that they are going to, skirt around the bush and leave people to die because they're now a profit, they're now a private domain, and rather than in the public domain. So that's part of the framework too. I think an easy misconception here would be that people totally have forgotten the importance of the fire department because it's in the private domain now. So I think you have to be careful of that as well when examining this. So,
well, another thing that we need to acknowledge, that even though it's an anarcho-capitalist system, people are automatically going to assume that it's capitalism driven and it's only for profit. Even now, we exist in a pretty heavy capitalist system. There are still nonprofit organizations that exist without government funds. So we're assuming that even in this stateless society, that nonprofit organizations are a prominent thing.
Right. I think they would be even more prominent because as the statistics show, charity would be, operating at an amazing level again, compared to right now. So
because we have useless government programs that do pretty much nothing, and anything that receives government funding doesn't really do too much.
Exactly. What else? What are the other big debates happening right now between anarcho-capitalism? Sargon often has debates with anarcho-capitalists. There's been movements where anarcho-capitalists are being, I guess, gifted with wokeness and becoming anarcho-communists, and it's just the anarcho community is the anarchist community is completely ambiguous right now. It's not concretely defined. It's often projected on message boards on the internet and portrayed as just completely chaotic. So is there any way that we can bring a solid set of principles and a reasoned debate, I guess, to this, or a solid set of fundamentals and principles to this whole debate on anarchism? There's people who believe right now that anarchists can only be communists because it's a stateless society, and Marx defined communism as being stateless. There's people who believe that anarcho-capitalism is the only end game to
the only
anarchism.
true form of anarchism.
Exactly. So how can we find, since it is, we've never had this necessarily, or have we? Is that something you can answer as well? I have not to this day been able to find a solid set of principles for anarchism to stand on. So maybe you can help out with that.
Well, one thing that I would do is I'd I hate this term, destigmatize the word anarchism, because right now it has a very negative connotation. When you hear anarchism, you think of chaos, you think of burning buildings, you think of the Ferguson riots, basically.
Right.
Because you automatically assume that an anarchist is someone like Antifa, a thug that's dressed in black, that's going to loot any store.
Right, yeah.
But that's, if you look at the fundamental values of anarcho-capitalism, you have the NAP. You have the idea that you don't hurt anyone unless they hurt you directly back. It's kind of like an eye for an eye principle. So, and also for people saying that the only true form of anarchism is communism, you really haven't looked very hard at any communist regimes, have you? Because all of those have a totalitarian regime in them, which is just absolutely horrible, and it doesn't benefit the people. It does benefit the people at all, and the communism, although it's supposed to be evenly distributed, all it does is make a hierarchy where you have one person at the top, a dictator usually, and then all of the people underneath him, and they're usually there is no middle class. There's one class, and it's supposed to be a middle class, but instead it's a very, very, very low class.
Right, the old saying of being reduced to the one common denominator, but it's a really freaking bad common denominator. So,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Marx set up this idea. We're about to get into this. The difference between anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-communism at the level of transition. From a state society to a stateless one. What are the fundamental things that need the fundamental points of transition, or what do those points of transition hold that allow a state society to become a stateless society operating under a capitalist economic system rather than a Marxist economic system? Why is there such a divide between these two groups of anarchism, and why? And because it all, I think it all has to stem in the transition period, obviously. So what
Mhm.
difference is there in this transition period that ends up having a stateless society that runs under Marxism, or having a stateless society that runs under capitalism? What has to be the key things that change, or what have to be the key things that are manipulated to end up in either of those two outcomes?
Well, any transition period, regardless of what's really happening, is going to be scary and is going to have its problems. Going from certain things being completely state run to being completely privatized is going to be scary. Like one person that I had a conversation with was talking about the federal Department of Education. I thought it was stupid because we've been paying more and more money for lower test scores that are constantly decreasing. Um, but and then you have, I said, have the proposal of all schools becoming privatized, and then they brought up, well, wouldn't that make prices very expensive for that? Yeah, at first it would, because if you think about it, like supply and demand for education is pretty high for children, but then the supply, as a if they're lower, the prices, because there's not going to be many private schools at first, they're going to have higher prices. But then once more and more open up, then you're going to see those prices even out and go down and down and down. And then another thing that I want to talk about is the idea behind anarchism or anarcho-capitalism is that it's abolishing the federal government. So think, how much is the federal government involved in your life as of right now? I mean, it's not involved entirely too much. Like, we don't see like President Trump right in front of us every time. But the idea behind it is that the more and more you get that involvement out of your life, the freer you become and the more liberties it restores. And if you what keeps it from becoming a communist society over a capitalist society, or what
Yeah,
keeps it from becoming a capitalist society over a communist society?
because yeah, the anarcho-communists, have the same goal too, which is to get rid of the federal government. So what is the point in transition that determines whether it's going to become a Marxist or a capitalist society?
Profit and selfishness.
Okay, so when you say selfishness, I get this like Ayn Rand vibe. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
Is there anything in there?
it's a very extreme vibe, but that's basically what I'm going for. You have the idea that, like, it basically, think about it this way: whenever you go to the market, you go and you pay your prices for your food, and that's what you get. You come out with your prices.
Right.
If you abolish the federal government and you end up with you end up with a communist situation, you go into the market and everyone takes their equal share of food, and that's it. No one's going to want to take equal shares of food. Remember communes? Yeah, that was a great idea, right?
Right.
Didn't end well.
Yeah.
The idea is, and it was kind of like, what was it? Adam Smith or John Smith? Adam Smith, right?
Yeah, Adam Smith was laid the groundwork for capitalism, if that's who you're about to
Yeah,
talk about.
Adam Smith. So the idea was that you would have societies where people would, they would all, you had this idea where everyone would work, and then everyone had their rations, and they would go and take their food. And there would be people that would work, and they'd work hard, and then they'd go and take their food. But then there would be people that just sat around and did nothing, and then they would take their food too. So you have that big stockpile in the middle of town. People are working for that food, then there are people that are just sitting around, but they realize that they can get the food regardless. So then people started coming up with the idea, like Adam Smith, where people that worked got to eat, people that didn't.
Right.
So that's one of the ideas that I think would influence the people would realize the stupidness that if someone is, it's kind of like, it goes back to a welfare state too. But if I'm working really hard, I'm working to get my money so I can go to the store and I can buy more food because I've been working really hard. But then there's someone over here who's been sitting down doing nothing, just waiting, and they're just like, oh wait, I can go and collect my food whenever I want. That's where those who are participating in this the society will realize that it goes towards the capitalist motives and ideas before it will go to a communist one.
And I assume that, in a stateless society, you're, the idea of voluntarism is heavily in there because now there's no force by any greater authority. So
imagine a world without a sales tax, Alex.
Exactly, yeah. So now you're relying on the first precepts of humans, just how humans act on a day-to-day basis, and there's some psychology involved there, and there's some anthropology involved in everything. But what is it? There's got to be some element of just the human mind that has to be driven to either a collectivist society, and we're talking stateless here, either collectivist or individualist with a more profit bent, with a capitalist bent. So it has to come from the human. Like, what drives the human towards profit rather than sharing on a collective scale, in a collectivist system? Is there something very primitive about, because there is actually a faction of anarchism called anarcho-primitivism, which is
I actually have a good thing to lead off of that when you talk about anarcho-primitivism and anarcho-communism.
Yeah, well, I'm just getting to the idea that when you're left without a state, it's really just how humans react with one another, and how they and what leads human interaction towards profit rather than sharing on a collectivist scale. So how do humans, just the bare nature of humans, sway the direction in the favor of capitalism over communism?
I mean, you can look at original really old societies for that. There was, all right, so say this person decides to plant a bunch of food. He has all the food, but then a lot of other people want the food too. So he establishes a society in which he has the biggest house and he rules over the society. And then there are a bunch of people below him, and they have smaller houses because they didn't make the food and they don't own the food. Those are ancient societies, basically. Those are river civilizations. And that's just a basic human thing that happens. If I control all this stuff, I'm going to be above you. And
Right.
And when you talk about the anarcho-primitivism and anarcho-communism and all that, I saw a meme one time, and we got to tie in memes in this to keep it lighthearted. Where it was an anarcho-primitivism ball following anarcho-communism. Anarcho-communism stops and wonders why it's being followed by anarcho-primitivism, and anarcho-primitivism says that anarcho-communism is the fastest way to get to anarcho-primitivism, being funny because anarcho-primitivists are basically primitive in the sense that we're going to be throwing rocks at each other as a form of what's the word, as a form of violence and just stone agedness. You'd be living in mud huts and you wouldn't be advanced anymore at that point. You reduce society to its lowest form.
I would ask what principles lead civilization to that level, to that to regress that much, but I'm not talking about anarcho-primitivism in this discussion.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's fine, but like the thing that I'm trying to understand, you brought up the idea of a hierarchy almost, which is this is when the anarcho-communists begin to clash with the anarcho-capitalists, is the first mention of the ancient civilizations where power or hierarchies of power came into play. And I don't know if you know a lot about communism or the Marxists, but their ideology is actually based more off of power than capitalism is. The Marxists play off of power whenever they get the chance, because that actually lays the groundwork for their ideologies, because they think that everything is based off of power, and it's power politics and everything. So at the first mention of, okay, in ancient, Sumeria or whatever, Mesopotamia, we have these agricultural dominance hierarchies. And I would say they're dominance hierarchies in that, there's people who control the resources and they are doing 90% of the work. Another portion of people are doing 5% of the work, and another portion of people are doing like 3% of it, whatever, it goes down.
Yeah.
And that's actually something called the Pareto distribution that can be, and I'll talk about this a little later in maybe the postmodernism part, but there's this statistical representation that people do. There's this group of people that do all of the work, then there's a group of people that do less of the work, and there's a group of people that do even less of the work, and that's just natural. It can be graphed purely mathematically, and it holds up in every single civilization, no matter what economic system they're under. It holds up every single time. So, given that, looking at ancient Mesopotamia, this is the question. Given those dominance hierarchies that exist in every single civilization, can you have a dominance hierarchy without having a state?
All right, this is going to be a really bad comparison. But think think about a plantation.
Right.
You have the person running the plantation, you have the slaves in the field, you have the slaves in the house. There's a social hierarchy. There's a hierarchy for you without a state. Not a good one, because slavery. That's
Right.
not exactly a good thing. But it's a comparison that can be made. But when we're talking about the how there's going to be a group of people that's going to do most of the work and then less of the work, I feel like that's exactly what would come about of an anarcho-communist system, because you have the people that are working for. You have all these people, and they're all working equally for this large share of food in this case. But there would be people that would decide, I'm not going to really work, but because I can get this food, and it's going to be the same as everyone else.
Well, I'm gonna stop you right there and say that this distribution has been shown to come up in every single civilization, whether it's run under Marxism or capitalism. So,
Okay.
if that's one of the, that has to be one of the fundamentals of the society, even under an anarcho-capitalist society. How does that play into how can you have people who have all of the resources, and then a group of people that have less of the resources, and a group which is also a group of people that does less work, because that's one of the principles in capitalism, where if you do less work, you are going to end up with less resources. So I guess I'm sort of already answering the question, but it's how can you have this dominance hierarchy without a state sort of just emerging? I think that's what like the anarcho-communists always try to rat out the anarcho-capitalists for. They say, oh well, you guys, with profit, there's always and with resources that are being held privately, there's always the potential for a hierarchy to arise, and then out of that hierarchy comes the state. That's what the anarcho-communists claim. So how can you have this hierarchy, which manifests itself in every single society, and not have a state arise? Like, what are the defenses against a state arising in that? Like, and remember, everything's owned privately on the individual by individual basis, yet there's still a hierarchy. So how does a state not arise then, I guess, is the question.
I think that the state wouldn't, from my perspective, the state would be kept at bay, and it wouldn't arise due to the idea of intervention from an outside source between two private individuals.
All right, would you sort of rephrase that so I can get a little clearer idea?
So, like, basically, modern parallel to that would be like a sales tax. The thing that stops a state from arising is having a third party intervening in between an exchange between two people. If I want to give you silver for a, a ton of grain or something like that, I should be able to give you that directly. And then say we had established a state in that, then the state can be like, oh well, since you guys are in my land and we're associating between, or you guys are making that trade on my land, then I'm going to take this a little bit of that cut from there. So I'm going to take a little bit of your silver, and I'm going to take a little bit of your grain. The idea is that intervention that prevents it.
Okay, so let's say in the anarcho-capitalist society, I'm trying to make a voluntary exchange of goods with you on somebody else's private property, on their land, let's say, which is a part of private property. And this guy is like upper echelon in the dominance hierarchy, has all of these resources, has like way more grain than we do, way more gold. He has a bunch of weapons, he has artillery. And he sees that we're making a deal, an exchange on his land. And like you said, he wants a cut of that. How do we prevent him from taking that cut if he has all of this artillery pointed at us and can do so? You know, he can force us to hand over the goods, the portion of the goods, at the point of the gun. How are we going to prevent that from arising in this dominance hierarchy where, you know, this guy has everything?
Because then that arises with the NAP. Then you get into the non-aggression principles and having if it's a reasonable trade, which I mean I hate throwing around the word reasonable because it doesn't exactly have a finite definition or a defined a concrete one. That's the term I'm looking for.
Yeah.
It's the idea behind force is that nothing should be forced. It should all be voluntary. So if us two are on this private property, we're already agreeing to the terms of service that this guy is put on for letting us be on his private property, or else we'd be violating the NAP. You have that. We have that. We have accepted those terms of service. So if he wants a small cut of it, then we would be obliged to give into that.
Or but get off his land, right?
Yeah, or get off his land and go to something say there's one person over here who has this. They want to take a small cut of it. If we're on the private property, we're on this dude's land. But then there's someone over here is just like, if you want to make trades on my land, then I'll just take a little bit smaller of a cut. You can there's going to be competition in that sense, or you can just go and find some place that doesn't have any private property on it.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So that there's definitely ways to
prevent the state from arising.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's
because the voluntary exchanges is what keeps the state from arising.
Okay, got it. And
voluntary and force, basically. That's what I'd say.
Right, and when somebody infringes on your life, which is your property as well, it's, you have a natural right to your life. You can defend yourself as well, which is the last resort to defending, your own property. So then, no force needs to be exchanged because both people have weapons. But obviously this guy has artillery, but in that case you can just leave. And if a bunch of people leave, and this guy is amassing wealth off of taking people's money based on their transactions, and everybody just doesn't do their transactions on his land, then he's not going to have all that money anyway. So there you go. Yeah. I mean, it seems like it all just works out, and the state can be prevented. The formation of the state based on the dominance hierarchy can be prevented just due to the natural the freedoms of the freedom of movement, the freedom of voluntary exchange, and the freedom to defend yourself from force. So yeah, I mean it seems like all the principles work out in nature to prevent the state from arising, which is what the anarcho-communists have always blamed or have always pinpointed the anarcho-capitalists for. And I think It's a reasonable argument for the communists to make because everything in their mind has to do with power. So, yeah, they think that this guy has the most power, so he's going to form the state. So, but there's checks on power in nature, just like there's checks on power in our government. But in government, they're they're not always checked. So, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. And those are like the big questions that often get asked by Marxists to, or even just people who don't understand anarchism, to anarcho-capitalists, because it seems like their movement is the most questionable right now. Anarcho-communism has always been the underground scene because, and I think part of that is because of postmodernism that we'll get into, yeah, I think that's good for anarchy.
Also, I have another thing that I forgot to mention.
Whatever you want to expand on.
Sure. For one of the topics that that I forgot to mention and completely forgot to write down was the state versus federal border patrol.
Okay, so like a devolution of power to the state, to like states.
Basically, should the if we live in Arizona, should Arizona have the power to make decisions on what happens on the border, or should the state have the decision to make what happens on the border?
I think
because I have two good arguments for this, and I'd like to bounce them off and you see what you think.
And I assume you're trying to devolve the power to the states, right, rather than the federal government?
Well, I have one for each side.
Oh, okay, great. Go ahead.
So, in the state sense, is that I don't think that it's really explicitly set anywhere in the Constitution that says that that a state can't do anything regarding its own borders. So that would fall under the 10th Amendment, which would give the state the power to regulate their border and what comes in and out of their state. On that border idea. And then the federal sense is that there's how many border states? 4 border states, right? Texas, California, New Mexico, and Arizona?
Yeah.
So there's 4 border states with Mexico. So the idea is that if we're going to have regulations on that border, then they should all be the same rather than different between the 4. So that would be the federal argument.
Okay.
So can you see where I'm having this dilemma and this problem?
Yeah, should the policy be the same for all of them, or should they have their own...
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
I'm all for states' rights, but when it comes to the border, that's something I'm passionate about. I live in a border state. I got to deal with this,
I believe in the Constitution, not in the amendments, but in the actual documents, there's... in one of the articles, there is something about the federal government being able to protect states from intrusion. Being able to, that doesn't mean that they have to control multiple states under the same policy, but there is something in one of the articles about the federal government protecting states, the union's states from intrusion.
Well, another thing that I was going to bring up is that in the Constitution it says that no singular states can make treaties with other countries. So I wonder if there would be a problem in that sense. If California decided, we'll make this deal with Mexico that if their people come over, then they'll technically be allowed here, but then Arizona wouldn't have that. Does that kind of thing does that treaty in a sense violate the Constitution?
It probably does, and I think you will hear from the Federalist argument, perspective, is that a state doing that threatens the stability of a union, right? And from the more, I guess you could say the more Confederacy perspective, a confederation would be okay with that because they would be for devolving power to the states as much as possible. So the Federalists, especially right now, the size of the federal government, number one, yes, I think it would infringe on the Constitution, so it's not going to get past the Supreme Court. And number two, even if it did get past the Supreme Court, the huge size of the government right now is just they would try to do anything they could to prevent it from happening. So to prevent a single state from making a treaty with a foreign nation. So it's especially when Texas is involved. As soon as the Supreme Court rules that it's okay, then Texas will try to do something, and the huge federal government with the lefties all in there will try to pull something crazy. So yeah, and what you would get is, as soon as Texas pulls that, the lefties are going to run to try to put somebody into the Supreme Court that would basically say, put so many limitations on the states that, holy crap, it would just everything would fall apart. We would be under more authoritarian rule than we already are. So
yeah,
it's a very that's obviously I'm for I think states should be able to make their own treaties with foreign nations. I think it should be as devolved as possible.
So which side of the argument do you fall on? Do you think that the states should be in charge of what happens on their border? Or do you think that it should be up to the
Fed?
Yeah. Where do you set it?
Definitely the states with their own border should have their own agency in deciding that. So what happens on their border is their decision.
All right. Well, now let me propose something to you, a hypothetical, or technically not really hypothetical. So, California just declared themselves a sanctuary state.
Okay.
So let's say illegal immigrants decide they want to come into America through California.
Right.
Because Arizona has too strict of guidelines. They come to America through California, which has very lax ones. So they basically are protected in California as technical citizens. I don't know, sanctuary city. They're stupid. They're protected in that sense.
Right.
And they decide that they want to go from California into all the other states because that's what you would usually do. They go from California and they decide they want to go to Arizona. So now that, because California has this problem, Arizona has this problem as well.
Right.
So do you think that do you still think that
But wouldn't the state being able to, the state in the union being able to control its own borders, wouldn't that apply to every border on every side of the state? So that means that they could prevent those people from coming in from California?
Alright, yeah, very true. But in this hypothetical situation, let's say it's just really easy to go back and forth into and out of Arizona and California.
Okay.
Do you think that if immigrants start crossing over and then they come into Arizona, we have that illegal immigration problem? Do we need to urge California to do that between states, or do we have to have the federal government get involved where New Mexico and Texas and California all have to be in this one? They'll have to be in this one
agreement under the federal government. Yeah, I think pragmatically, today, yes. Pragmatically meaning for the best of our future, for I hate to say it, but for the Southwestern collective, right?
Mm-hmm.
The greatest thing for our future at this point in time is, yeah, for the federal government to probably have to step in pragmatically. Ideally, no, but pragmatically, yes. So, yeah, that's a hard debate because that is another one of those
Paradoxes.
yeah, where it's you have this huge problem. This I don't know. I was just thinking. I blanked for a moment there because I was just thinking about how the alt right views things as well for a second, because they view things, collectively, where it's like you have this huge, massive, people coming from other nations, and they're going to destroy your culture, and we have to do something to protect it. And are you going to let people have their own agency to, like, let all these people into their homes, or are you going to deny people that right to let them into your state? Blah blah. It's all that. It's that debate where it's like, pragmatically right now, what is the best thing to do, but ideally what allows us the most freedom. And pragmatically, it's like we have this union set up, and we, for the best of the future right now, it's probably just best to have an agreement between the southwestern states and really pressure California into working it out. And if that means defunding, getting rid of federal funding, that's one of the ways to do it, and I'm not opposed to that pragmatically. That's the key word.
All right, so now I have another proposition.
Yeah.
So you say that there should be an agreement between the states. Do you think that there's a way to have a U.S. Mexican border states group without having the federal government involved in it?
A coalition.
Yeah, like a coalition government in a sense.
Actually, that I
where you have these 4 states working together to regulate what goes across this border, which only involves them.
And you're saying that this is not like its own break off from the U.S.
It's
government.
not like it's the same. We're still these 4 states in the United States, and we're still part of the Union. But is there a way to have that, have that group of people, like we have the 4 governors of all these states, come together and work as a team to regulate what goes on that border?
Yeah, and honestly, that's probably, I haven't researched it much, but that's probably happening right now. I mean, because that seems like that's probably the best way of going about doing it without having to get the federal government involved to a great extent. I mean, yeah, federal government's still going to challenge the federal funding towards California's, the money that we give to California, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the best routes of solving this issue of immigration across the U.S. Mexican border, which would be to, like you said, have a little coalition set up. They get down, they go into a room, they have the meetings, the governors, the representatives, congressmen should definitely be involved from these 4 states, and they battle this thing out. They debate. I bet it's happening. There's got to be something going on between these states. It's at the same time, though, it would be hard to believe that Arizona is having nice talks with California, but
it's hard to think that Texas would be having nice talks with California.
Right, exactly. So,
it's funny because there's kind of like you got the 2 extremes on each side. You have California and Texas, and then you have the 2 somewhat moderates in between on each sides as well. You have Arizona and New Mexico. New Mexico usually going somewhat blue, and then Arizona remaining usually red. And then you have Texas, usually very much red, and then you have California very much blue.
See, that geographical setup, though, with those bents and ideology, could actually set up something that works out quite nicely, though. So
finding a middle ground between the 4 states.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't know. I mean, now that I live out here where we do have these issues, it's interesting to see.
I mean, I guess it's a lot different than New Jersey.
Yeah, where it's who cares who comes in, because everybody's coming from everywhere. It's like New York was every culture was there, but everybody. No, I shouldn't say that. Not everybody got along. They were all in their own neighborhoods, which I found was always interesting. But well, that's a different discussion. But
Mm-hmm.
all right, is that
Here,
good?
yeah. Do you want to take a little quick 5 minute break before we get to next segment?
Sure. Next segment, we'll do postmodernism, university, college campus stuff.
All right. Let's take.
All right, and we're back from the break here. We're going to move on to discussing postmodernism, which is a philosophy that has come up in recent times under the guise of Marxism and cultural Marxism, which is something that has been the term cultural Marxism is a term that's been passed around rampantly amongst like 4chan users and Reddit users and very well-known YouTube social commentators such as
Sargon of Akkad.
Sargon talks about it a lot. Well, I mean, at least
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson talks about Marxism straight up without the cultural word added in there, because he thinks that, this is just Marxism. This is what it is happening on, this is Marxism happening on universities and college campuses. So, postmodernism is a funny thing because I never really heard the term used until Jordan Peterson and Camille Paglia. Camille Paglia used it a while back, but it has its roots in the 1960s when all the civil unrest was happening in the United States, and there were the protests against the wars happening, and the art and the sexual revolution and avant-garde art coming out, which we'll discuss a little bit, because avant-garde has been construed now to not even be what it was originally intended to be. It's supposed to be art that is not of the norm, and yet people, the postmodernists are making avant-garde represent exactly what they think is the norm and things like that, and everything's getting chaotic. But so the image I have up on the screen there is a good visual representation of two artists that one is a modernist and one is a postmodernist, and and they're looking at how they define themselves to be intellectuals. One straight up says that they're an intellectual or a genius, which is the modernist, because they literally say to the world that, well, I am a genius. Look at me, I am a genius artist. While the postmodernist says, in this very messed up linguistic just word salad, the category of genius is a theoretically untenable cultural construct, but thinks to himself that I am a genius. So this is actually a play on what's been going on college campuses, where you have a lot of social sciences professors and women's studies and gender studies professors who have created those curriculums, and they put themselves into those curriculums as the professors, right? And they don't say it outright, but they portray themselves to be these very intelligent people that speak a language that is completely different to what most people speak. And we'll find here that postmodernism is actually rooted, or it comes from, a totally different set of linguistic mechanisms than than the normal English way of speaking, the normal English language. So
normies.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? If you go on Tumblr, you'll find a bunch of postmodernists who claim that normies are just social constructs. So but that actually is where this whole social construct thing comes from, is postmodernism, where they believe postmodernism is a form of post-structuralism. So we'll talk about what that is first. So post-structuralism here is the idea that we're living in a world that is post-structural. So that means that everything can be deconstructed down to something else, into an infinite amount of different things. So that means that when I look at a person, right, I can say, well, that's not a person, that is a transgender person, right? Okay, so that's a form of deconstruction of identity, right, where they believe that oh well,
going into subcategories rather than
exactly,
one large category.
exactly,
Getting away from generalizations and getting into specifics.
right. So
Unnecessary specifics.
exactly, and it's amazing because we always knew that these things were happening, right? We always knew that women's studies and gender studies classes were happening on campuses, and we always laughed at them as being the, rightfully so, because they are literally grounded in almost no peer-reviewed studies, or no, they have almost no citations to back up their studies, like literally zero in some cases. So but while we laugh at them, we're actually ignoring the fact that these classes come from a real branch of philosophy, which is the postmodernist philosophy, and the which is predicated on the post-structuralist philosophy, which they sort of go hand in hand with each other. And so if I can take if I can take the idea of being a genius, right, in this example, and I can say that, oh, being a genius is a cultural or a social construct, right? That being a genius cannot be backed up by anything objective, right? Like that's what he's saying basically, that genius is theoretically untenable cultural construct. That means that that number one, that implies that IQ is out of the picture, that he's totally given up the idea of IQ, that as being a measurement of intelligence, or any type of intelligence test, SAT, PSAT, even like the College Board ones, for example, which are what we all take. That's one of the fundamental principles of this philosophy, is that when I look at something such as intelligence, I am going to deconstruct it until you can no longer look at it without being mind-bogglingly confused. And all of a sudden, intelligence will mean nothing to you because I just made you confused by the whole thing. But at the same time, I'm going to make you think that I am a genius in doing it. Because I just, it's like sitting around, it's like when somebody is a and I'll get into some studies later on that show that are pretty funny, but it's almost like sitting around with somebody who has like borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia, and they're just babbling on about random crap, and it's like you're trying, like you ask them, well, like how did how did Darwin come up with his theory of evolution or something like that? They will deconstruct it into a bunch of random words, and they'll never give you a straight up answer for what his theory is. They'll say it's all these constructs, and here they are, and there it is, and this paintbrush is actually a pencil, and because I said so, and this book has two beginnings and two endings because it does, and no, I mean, I think that a book, that's actually one of the good examples, is one of the original writings, one of the original postmodern writings was literally, I think books can have two endings or infinite endings and infinite beginnings. And it's like, that's like just objectively not true. But the thing is, objectivity is gone in postmodernism. It's completely gone. There's no objectivity. Everything is a narrative. That's another thing. Everything is a narrative in postmodernism. So white people have their own narrative to society, and black people have their own narrative in society. There is no objective history. There is white history. There is black history. There is transgender history. There is this history. There is that history. There is no objective history. There's no objective anything. It's all subjective. Everything's a narrative. So what you might get from that then is that, wow, this philosophy is a very convenient and expedient philosophy to use when you have lost the objective argument, when you can no longer rely on actual solid facts, and you have to then claim that, well, you are just spewing a narrative based in power, and you are wrong because you're spewing your own narrative. It's such a convenient way to. This philosophy just provides a convenient way for people like, who are the SJWs and stuff to just, and of course they unconsciously, they're unconsciously
bias.
yeah, they're unconsciously biased in the direction of postmodernism. They're unconsciously Marxists in this way. They're unconsciously collectivists because most of them just don't even know this. They just spew what their postmodern philosopher, postmodern professors tell them. So they here, I'll go to one of these articles now from Camille Paglia. So I'm going to read something here. It's pretty good.
Make sure it's displayed.
Yeah, so Camille Paglia, what were the other influences of postmodernism? Postmodernism has also been impacted by the Frankfurt School of Analysis of Popular Culture, another boringly outmoded system created in the 1930s even before the birth of television. The Frankfurt School, based on Marxism, is full of insulting assumptions about modern media. It postulates that the mass audience of ordinary people are stupid and passive and easily brainwashed by evil conspiratorial media empires. This is an idiotic view of popular culture. The exact opposite is the truth. The people decide what they like in movies, television, and music, and they vote for it with their money. Media empires are commercial operations that seek only profits. Hence, it is the media empires themselves that are passive to outside forces, not the people who hold the real power. Both the Frankfurt School and post-structuralism are arrogant and elitist, full of contempt for the common people that they claim to defend. So that's another thing too, is I was just talking about the professors. The professors claim that they defend the middle class, right? And you have all these like anarcho-communists coming out saying, we defend the middle class, we defend these people. While the professors that they sit in their college classes and their professors are spewing all this crap about like how, we're smarter than everyone because we believe this thing. We read this philosophy. And,
but at that point, doesn't it come down to the idea of willful ignorance?
Exactly, yeah. But this philosophy profits off of willful ignorance, right? That's what it breeds off of. It like breeds off of willful ignorance because people can use this philosophy when they've lost the argument in an objective discussion. They can just say, well, if it's a black person debating a white person on income inequality, they can just rush to the convenient explanation of, well, you're a white person and you're spewing a white narrative, so we can't have this argument then. That's a postmodern way of explaining, of basically finishing the argument. It's convenient. It's extremely convenient. But at the same time, the people who, like the professors, right, here's the simultaneous hypocrisy. All right, so the professors will say, we are fighting for the proletariat, we're against the bourgeoisie and everything, and there's the Marxist underpinning. But then at the same time, they'll say, we are the smartest people here, and we have the power. And they'll trash the white people in the Appalachian Mountains, for example, like the middle class, the coal miners, whatever. They hate the people who actually make the most for society, like with their bare hands, and yet they claim to be for the proletariat. So it's how that again, yeah, it's the willful ignorance. The professors preach it, the students just freaking bite onto it, and they don't realize that it's a philosophy that is elitist in nature when they claim to be against elitism. So I'm going to look into a little bit more here. It's also the postmodern philosophy was really evident in the original Marxist revolution when they were trying to get rid of what they deemed to be outdated structural systems such as like religion and capitalism and all of those, all the knowledge that we had before. So for example, like Jordan Peterson believes that modern philosophy came into vogue in the 1970s. He basically says that after classic Marxism, especially of the economic type, had been so thoroughly discredited that no one but an absolute reprobate could support it publicly. That's when postmodernism came into full effect. He said it's not possible to understand our current society without considering the role postmodernism plays within it. He says, quote, because postmodernism is in many ways, especially as it's played out politically, is the new skin that the old Marxism now inhabits. He says, quote, even the French intellectuals had to admit that communism was a bad deal by the end of the 1960s.
Mm.
He says, from there, the communists played a, quote, sleight of hand game in some sense, and rebranded their ideology, quote, under a postmodern guise. And he says that's where identity politics came from. And from there, it, quote, spread like wildfire from France to the US, through the English department at Yale University, quote, and then everywhere. Marxism preached that the natural and economic landscape is a battle between the so-called proletariat and the bourgeois. It claimed that economic systems were going to enslave people and keep them down, Peterson said. In practice, however, blah, 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 communism, murderous results, we know all of this. But it's the fact that, let's see, here we go, yeah. The postmodernists built on the Marxist ideology, Peterson said, quote, they started to play a sleight of hand, and instead of pitting the proletariat, the working class, against the bourgeois, they started to pit the oppressed against the oppressor. That opened up the avenue to identifying any number of groups as oppressed and oppressor, and to continue the same narrative under a different name. So then, and this is when Peterson pretty much defines cultural Marxism. He says, it was no longer specifically about economics, he said. It was about power. And everything to the postmodernists is about power. That's actually why they're so dangerous, because if you're engaged in a discussion with someone who believes in nothing but power, all they are motivated to do is to accrue all the power to them, because what else is there, he said. There's no logic, there's no investigation, there's no negotiation, there's no dialogue, there's no discussion, there's no meeting of minds and consensus, there's power. So, like, yeah, it's postmodernism is, in looking at this picture here, you can still see that the man on the left openly says that I am a genius. So what does it mean when you openly declare something of value to society? It means that you're willing to say, you have some pride in saying it, and you're holding it to be true. You have some conviction in it. While the person on the right, the postmodernist, thinks to themselves that they're a genius. Meanwhile, they give some backwards reasoning as to why being a genius is it's just such a lie. It's a big lie that that we are against. Oh, we're against people, against the people who hold all the power, but then we want all the power. So I think one of the big things that you can see this in is in the feminist movement, the modern feminist movement, when they claim that, the men are controlling the women and they have all the power, when and then you see following that subsequently the feminists want to control the men then. Well, control is just a means of obtaining power. So, and that's, it's what this all thrives off of, and it's what they're teaching in gender studies and women's studies and African American studies and everything. It's all power based. It's all about power. It's not about principles. It's not about, virtue. It's not about, anything moral. It's about power. It's about saying random crap, and at the same time, after saying that random crap, thinking that you're somehow, better than somebody else when you literally just said random crap. So this is another thing that he said. We have been publicly funding extremely radical postmodern leftist thinkers who are hell-bent on demolishing the fundamental substructure of Western civilization. That's no paranoid delusion. That's their self-admitted goal, he said, noting that their philosophy is heavily based in the ideas of French philosopher Jacques Derrida, quote, who I think most trenchantly formulated the anti-Western philosophy that is being pursued so assiduously by the radical left. The people who hold this doctrine, this radical postmodern communitarian doctrine that makes racial identity or sexual identity or gender identity or some kind of group identity paramount, they've got control over most low to middle level bureaucratic structures in many governments as well, he said. But even in the US, where you know a lot of the governmental institutions have swung back to the Republican side, the postmodernist types have infiltrated bureaucratic organizations at the mid to upper level. I don't think its dangers can be overstated, Peterson said, and I also don't think the degree to which it's already infiltrated our culture can be overstated. So,
Man, you went on for a long time.
yeah, I think it's because I think it's just interesting. Like, we finally found where, like, all of this identity politics is, like, rooted in, you know? Like, this is where it's from. It comes from, it's similar, I guess. I mean, maybe, yeah, it's at least similar to this original idea of, like, everything can be deconstructed and objectivity doesn't exist. So I think that's dangerous, though, man. Like, as soon as you get rid of the idea of objectivity, like, what are you gonna do without objectivity? It's pretty scary. And of course, religion goes away with this as well, as it always does.
Well, I have something to tie into that with identity politics with postmodernism.
Sure.
So I think this is back in one of our Twitter conversations. I'll try and pull it up here right quick. And I'll send it over to you. Just so we can get it up. So basically, this is basically another installment of what pisses me off. So basically, it's a little thing, and it shows a picture of the White House meeting during the debate on women's health, I guess, basically birth control. This is kind of what we talked about last week, but I'm bringing it back because I had one point to make on it because this pissed me off a lot.
Sure.
So the caption reads, "Not a single woman was at the White House meeting on women's health." So the only reason they don't like it is because they're saying, oh, it's straight white men that are regulating what I can and can't do with my body. Which in an individualistic sense I can understand, but, you know, this is how democracy works.
Right.
But one thing that I think is hilarious is the hypocrisy. They fought so hard to get Bernie Sanders elected so that they could have abortions at 9 months and still be okay with it. And there probably wouldn't be any women in this meeting either, but it's still straight white men that are regulating their health, but in the way they want.
Right.
So they're still regulating health, just in a different way. So just acknowledge the fact that you want the exact same. You want the outcome of it to be people that are regulating your health in a way that you want. Personally, I think the best way to go about this would be not having the regulations on the health at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Why push for the regulation in the first place? I don't know, man. That's just something that pissed me off. And then if you want to, from there, we can check that into California fiasco.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's a lot to unpack, right?
Yeah, it's freaking, it's pretty crazy. to be honest. It's scary.
So you want me to start unpacking that, or you want to?
No, you can go ahead on that one if you want. The pronouns.
All right. So here, while I'm reading it off, if you can find some articles, that would be great. So California recently, being the interesting state that it is, has decided that it's made a lot of things. California Governor Jerry Brown has declared California a sanctuary state, as opposed to just having sanctuary cities. He's declared a sanctuary state. So that's just something in itself. But that's not what we're focusing on right now. Right now we're focusing on finding people for misgendering people and referring to them with the wrong pronouns. So if I went up to a trans person and I said, and they are a male to female trans person, and I said, "Hey, how's it going, my man?" then I could be fined for that. But this is where it becomes a fiasco. Knowingly donating blood that has HIV or AIDS in it is not a criminal offense. And knowingly giving people AIDS is not an offense either. Now, I mean, I know California's a little special and a little behind on the times, even though they're supposed to be very forward. Speech is not something that you can just imprison people for. Because there's no such thing as hate speech. That is a fluid term, and hate speech to me could be basic speech to anyone else. That's just how it is. Free speech, hate speech is protected in the First Amendment. There have been many Supreme Court cases on this, and they have always favored the Constitution, free speech, regardless. Free speech, First Amendment. That's what it is. So it's a violation of the First Amendment. Just because you don't refer to someone as he or she, even though they changed their gender, that's not a criminal offense. Because, like we said last week, you're asking me by law to call someone a he who is biologically a she. You're asking me to throw out biology, and you're asking me to throw out everything that I know and just get rid of it, which is kind of like what we were talking about with postmodernism. We got to get rid of everything that we've known, just replace it with this, because feelings and social constructs, because gender is apparently now a social construct instead of biology. And then knowingly giving people AIDS. Yeah, I get that we're trying to destigmatize it, but donating blood that has HIV or AIDS in it.
That's how you ended up with an epidemic.
Yeah, I'm never going to get a blood transfusion in California ever again. And you would think, and we want to think that people will be smart enough that have HIV, they won't donate blood, but this is California we're talking about.
So apparently it's just it says it's reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor, but it's like
a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
And then what's the punishment for the misusing pronouns? I don't have it in front of me right now.
It says they'll be able to jail them. Law's effect is limited to nursing homes and other long-term care facilities, but mandates that those who, quote, willfully and repeatedly refuse to, quote, to use a transgender resident's preferred name or pronouns can be slapped with a $1,000 fine and up to 1 year in prison.
A year in prison. I mean, we're trying right now to decriminalize marijuana so people don't end up in prisons with harsh sentences. Imagine going to prison and your bunkmate asks you, "So what are you in for?" "Oh, I called a trans person she." While you're bunked with someone who's murdered 3 people.
Yeah.
Because that's the world we live in now, where we can jail people for saying she instead of he, or z instead of zer, or whatever the dumbass neutral pronouns are.
Alright, you ready? Listen to this right here. You ready for this?
Okay, I'm reading.
Our LGBT seniors built the modern LGBT community and led the fight for so many of the rights of our community. that our community takes for granted today. It is our duty to make sure that they can age with the dignity and respect they deserve, Weiner wrote. I want to thank Governor Brown for joining our coalition and supporting this bill, which will make a real difference in people's lives. I'm sorry, I'm just like, that's just the LGBT.
Oh my god.
The LGBT Senior Bill of Rights is an important step in our fight to ensure all people are treated equally, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Dude, it's, oh my god, that's just filled with just pointless speech. None of it is, it's a big lie.
All of it, they try to start off with good intentions. It's just like, oh, we just want to make these people feel a little more welcome. You're going to make them feel welcomed with the threat of jail time to the other person. That's not very welcoming to me. Hey, just don't misgender people. What are you doing?
But you know what always, like, and here's the other thing too, is, you look at this guy who's saying, it's the duty to make sure they can age with the dignity and respect they deserve. Okay, so why does this guy think that he represents the entire LGBT community? Why does he think that, this law gives them respect and dignity?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's look at this law, all right? Well, let's look at the fundamental thing here. Like, okay, you misgender somebody. This ties back to the whole respect thing. How in the world is that, like, something out of disrespect? I don't understand that. And how is jailing somebody giving them respect? Giving the other person who was the victim here respect? I don't understand. How is making them into a victim of a new form of verbal harassment respect? That's actually very demeaning of that group of people. It, like, makes them, again, it's power. It's all about power here. It makes them, look like the victim, and it makes them take the victim card too, not out of their will even. So somebody can literally just come up to him and be like, that guy just verbally harassed you, and we're going to take him into custody for this. And then we're going to place charges on him, and then the now the quote unquote victim, which is this, like, this LGBT person, is like, well, like, wait a minute, why is this guy going to jail? Like, why? How does that make that person, that LGBT person, like, feel respected? I don't understand that. That's like the legal system's like demeaning that person, saying like, well, we represent all of you, we're protecting you through this legislation. What? It's like the opposite effect. Like, the state is saying that, we know what all of you deserve. Oh man, I don't know. I just find it really demeaning of that whole group of people.
I mean, are your pronouns really so important that you're gonna jail someone over it? I mean, I imagine all it is just you walk up and you just say, "Oh, hey, how's it going, dude?" or "How's it going, man?" And they say, "Okay, you misgendered me. I'm gonna go report you to the police," and you get fined with that. Or it can't just be as simple as, "Oh, I would prefer if you just said she," like, or refer to me with feminine pronouns. Like, why does the law have to be engaged in that, is my question.
Yeah, I think it's just another infringement on speech. That's all it is.
Life is hard. Life is hard in this 21st century we live in.
Reminds me a lot of Bill C-16 though, Ontario, Toronto, and it's messed up. And there's, again, Jordan Peterson and a bunch of, like, Ontario lawyers came out. Well, various, not a bunch, but a couple, I guess you could say. Well, some of them came out and were against it and everything, and it started this whole human rights like court in Ontario. Ontario has like a human rights court. Do we want the same thing in the U.S.?
Hmm.
I don't know.
It's
Do we want a separate court system that works outside our national, court system, the judicial system, or anything? I think that's dangerous. I mean, this also ties into Title IX, where the Obama administration practically gave the universities their own court system. So
mhm.
that's got to stop. And this could, begin that next set. Like having this thing where it's like pronouns, and all that, having a law surrounding that. You could have the California, human rights court soon. So that's not a
Well,
good thing to have.
yeah, and also the thing is, it's not that we just refuse to say people's pronouns. It's the force in it that we're not okay with. It's that you're restricting my speech. That's the problem. It's
Yeah.
not the we have to, oh god, we have to respect trans people now. What is this? It's now I have a restriction on my speech where if I go up to someone who looks like a man and I call them a man but they say they're a woman, then I can be jailed for that. That's the problem.
Well, it's also like compelled speech. Like you have to call them by the right thing.
Hmm.
It's like they're forcing you to say the right thing almost. It's just, that's just like 1984, man.
Yep.
I don't know. We have like 10 minutes left in this thing here. 2 hours.
10 minutes, man. We barely even did anything.
So much to cover.
You want to move on to GOP healthcare proposition?
Yeah, we could probably cover that pretty quick.
All right. I'm gonna guess you want me to take that one.
Sure. You have like an article or something? Or, I don't know.
I'll
Anything.
pull up. I'll pull up something right now. GOP healthcare. Let's just look at that. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that I can't really do that now because it's new. Oh yeah, GOP. Executive order. All right, so basically, right now we have the in the U.S. we have our infamous healthcare scandal and such. Not even a scandal, just the fiasco. I mean, I'm using that word a lot tonight, so I don't even feel bad about it. So we got that whole fiasco going, and basically the idea is that we have two sides. We either want socialized healthcare, where everyone gets equal healthcare, and it's taxpayer funded, or we start getting it back to the idea that you can buy across state lines. It gets closer to having it gets to a freer market basically. And the big thing about this one is that it's an executive order that President Trump signed, and he had the support of Rand Paul on this one, which is really, really big for Trump in this situation because Rand Paul has been one of his biggest critics in the Senate, and is I'd say one of the major reasons why we haven't gotten a Republican majority in favor of all of the replacements that he's proposed, or all of the Republicans have been proposing in office right now. So it's really big that Rand Paul is in support of this because if Rand Paul's on board with it, he's a doctor. He knows the field. He knows how things work. So when he's on board, it's a big deal. And basically, what this bill is supposed to, or this order is supposed to do, is it enables buying across state lines. So if I live in Arizona, I can buy healthcare from Delaware if it's a plan that fits me better. So you can buy across state lines, and it allows you allows smaller groups of individuals to get together and work, kind of like how if you were to get it at a business, in a sense, where you work. That's what it's supposed to act like.
Right.
So I mean, I'd say that's the biggest part about it, is just Rand Paul's support of it.
Yeah, that's the big news. I don't know. We'll just have to see what direction that goes. I mean,
I hope that it goes even further with this, because I would love for it to be open to a complete free market, just like Rand Paul had been saying. Like, he never really was on board with the repeal and replace. He was with the repeal, and that was it.
yeah.
So if we can see something more like that come about, it'd be hard to get the Democrats in the Senate on board with it, but it would be very, very, very impressive.
I'm fine with just repeal.
Yeah. What problems would you, if any, what problems would you see with a complete free market healthcare system?
I haven't been able to identify any, so I think it's pretty problem free.
One of the things that people keep bringing up are pre-existing conditions.
Right.
So, like, one thing that I was... Here, what were we going to say?
I think the idea of pre-existing conditions in the first place is, it goes against the idea of insurance, like, overall, because insurance is all about being able to insure for something before it happens. So it's almost like trying to buy insurance after you wreck your car, and wanting that insurance to pay for that car after you wrecked it, but you bought the insurance, like, again, like, after you wrecked it. So I don't know, it's sort of, I think it's use your head and buy the insurance before anything goes wrong.
Another thing that I was going to say to that is that hold on, I just blanked. If, like, these pre-existing conditions, they open up between multiple companies, just imagine if you're a company and you want to just make a ton of money and decide, hey, I'll make pre-existing condition things, but then you just charge either less, you charge more, and then other people start realizing, hey, you can make a profit off of this, so then you get more people opening up, that kind of thing. But I mean, I agree with you in the sense that it's like buying car insurance right after you have an accident.
Yeah.
Because if you come into a place, like, you just got diagnosed with cancer, you're just like, oh man, I guess I need health insurance now. These people aren't just going to go and pay for you to have cancer right if you didn't have it prior to.
Because insurance is all based on risk, right? So if you come in and you say, bro, I'm having a heart attack right now, it's like, dude, there's no risk then. Like, you're having this thing. Like, what? Like, you can't just buy insurance after after you know that you have the thing, and it's a disastrous thing, and then you tell that to the insurance people, and they're gonna charge you for this massive. They're gonna quote you a massive price then, because because it's like, dude, not only is there high risk, like, you have this thing now, or you already had it, so holy crap, dude, like, man, you should have gotten this insurance as soon as you could before you had any issues, because that's what insurance is all about. Like, as soon as you get a car, are you gonna wait until you have an accident to get the insurance?
No, you're gonna get it immediately, because it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. That kind of.
And while you're low risk too, that's like the best time to get it. So In fact, sometimes people say that like when you're low risk, um, some people like young people don't even have health insurance. Like or in a free market, some people wouldn't even have it because they're low risk. And then as they get to a certain point in their life, they or if they find something small from their doctor, it might be a sign where they're like, all right, well now it's time to get health insurance.
Mhm.
So yeah, like some young people are so perfectly healthy and they barely go to the doctor that they don't even have it in a free market.
I mean, I would love to live in a world where it's just like you can you don't really need the insurance. You can just walk into a place that's shoulder replacements are us, and you get a shoulder replacement or something like that, and pay a marked price that's there.
Yeah.
Or you have, or like say you need some sort of eye surgery, you go to the eye doctor, but instead of it being like, oh yeah, we're gonna have to pay something, it's marked up. It's like walking into a McDonald's or something. No, it's got prices right marked up there. This will cost this much, and this will cost this much. That's the dream right there, right?
Yeah, and like getting prescription meds like over the counter instead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Man, like I wish I could get like I have this like acne treatment, right? And I only get it like every 2 years because the thing is like expensive as all hell. So if that thing was over the counter and there were more like generic formulations that came out, man, I could get that stuff for like probably like $10.
Mm-hmm.
I bet.
And that's the idea, is driving costs down. But all we've been doing lately with all like the left leaning policies, all that's been happening is premiums have just been going up and prices have been going up, and things are getting harder to access than easier.
The Affordable Care Act and the if you have a doctor, you can keep your doctor.
Oh, top 10 anime betrayals.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, dude. All right, I don't know. I think we're gonna have to talk about Bitcoin and everything in next week's discussion.
Yeah, oh wow, we just completely glanced right over that.
Yeah,
I went out of order on that. I apologize.
it's all right. I have to read more articles anyway. There was one that just popped up on my Twitter feed. All right, I'll just point out that it surged past $5,000 earlier. So yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty dang good. And now they're saying Bloomberg is saying that there might be a bubble and it might burst, but I'm gonna just leave this by saying I don't think it's gonna burst.
Yeah.
So there.
All right.
Anyways, yeah, I think we're gonna leave this one until next week. Next week we'll talk about Bitcoin and who knows what type of things are gonna happen between this live stream and that one, but we'll see.
A lot can happen in a week.
Oh yeah, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
All right then. Until next time. My name's Alex.
I'm
getting
March.
off here. Sir.